How's it going, everybody? Uncanny Omar here with the legendary Larry Hama. How are you, sir?
Okay.
Okay, you just keep drawing. I'll ask the questions. Speaking of drawing, not only are you an artist, a writer, an actor, and musician, do you ever sleep, Larry?
I'm an insomniac, actually.
I got a fanboy out for a second.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the best run of Wolverine. Thank you for making G.I. Joe so badass. Like, while my friends were watching the cartoon, I'm like, you guys got to read the comics. You think Storm Shadow's a badass in the cartoon? You got to read the comics. Like, I gotta. So let's go back then. How did you get that job? Like, how did they reach out to you to write G.I. Joe, or did you have to write in a resume? How did that work out back then?
Well, I was a full editor at Marvel, but I'd been trying to get writing work, and nobody would give me writing work. They would say, you know, oh, you're an artist, you can't write. And in fact, I was able to prove to Jim Shooter that I had asked every single editor for writing work, and they'd all turned me down. So I had got special dispensation to write for other companies while still working as a full editor at Marvel.
Under the name Larry Hama?
Right. I was writing for Eerie magazine.
Yeah.
Wheezy, now she's Simonson, but back then she was Wheezy Jones, was the editor, and I did a bunch of stuff for her. And then Hasbro came to Marvel and wanted a comic book of G.I. Joe. Problem was that toy licensed books at that time paid the lowest rates.
Oh, okay.
Because the licensing fee came right off the top of the page rate. And so no A-list writer or artist would want to work on a licensed book, a toy book, or anything like that. That's why they were all crappy. None of the A-list or even B-list guys would, because it was like spitting in your wallet. You didn't make any money doing it. And this was before royalties.
Yeah.
Right? So Shooter asked every single writer, contract writer, and they all turned it down.
Wow.
And he asked all the other writers, they all turned it down, and all the editors and assistant editors turned it down. And he went down the row. He went down editor's row, asking every editor. And my office was the last office. So I was literally the last person that was asked. And I wanted to get my foot in the door writing, so I took it. And I wasn't particularly interested in doing a military comic. I got into the business because I wanted to do funny animals,
I guess in a way you kind of did with Wolverine after a while. Not so funny, but
Bucky O'Hare was the closest.
Bucky, that's right. Every time I see the Bucky O'Hare cartoon intro, my kids love the Bucky O'Hare cartoon intro. It's got the most kick-ass song, like for 80s cartoon intros. But they just brought back some of the toys, I think a couple of years ago. And do you still get like some kind of royalties for that, for co-creating the character Bucky O'Hare?
I get 25 cents on every dollar that comes in.
That is really good compared to, well, royalties in general.
I own 25%, and Michael Golden owns the other 25%, and Neil Adams owned the 50%.
Oh, Neil, that guy was a legend too. Okay.
But he gave us the best deal in town.
Yeah, he did.
Everybody else is paying like 2.5% or something,
Yeah.
whatever.
25% is a big deal. Okay, so
yeah, bought me a couple of houses.
I love hearing that. To be sitting here next to you, man, it's just crazy because like you were my childhood G.I. Joe comics, and then like I said, Wolverine. So G.I. Joe, you said you didn't want to write war comics, but how did you bring anything personal to G.I. Joe, like writing the characters? Were you a fan of the old school G.I. Joe toys or war comics growing up?
I never had any of the G.I. Joe toys. I was too old for that. But I read Sergeant Rock, and and I was a big fan of Russ Heath, and John Severin and all those guys. And I was actually more into that than I was into superheroes.
So for the silent issue of G.I. Joe, like how hard was it to push Marvel into publishing a book with no dialogue, and
Oh,
then
no,
let
it
the
wasn't
art?
like that at all. It was, Denny O'Neil was late on the schedule. A book had gone missing, or I don't know. They needed to get out a book in 2.5 weeks, and the only way, I figured the only way you could do that was to like cut out the lettering completely, because it used to take a week to 10 days to get a book lettered.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, if I write it and draw it over the weekend, and we get it, inked, do have, Steve Leialoha do the finishes over the next week, and you can feed the pages back, and we get it colored as he does them, then we can make the deadline. It was a matter of having to get the book out in 2.5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And we did it.
No, okay. So not only did you do that, but then later on, Marvel kind of borrowed that idea for the month of Nuff Said, where there was like silent issues across every single Marvel comic. And I remember when that came out, I'm like, Larry Hama already did that.
Well, they did, and also they didn't ask me to do one.
Of all the people, right?
Well, I was sort of persona non grata at Marvel at that point.
But from time to time, I do see your name, which is really wonderful to see, like, come back to characters like, I know Marvel doesn't own the rights to G.I. Joe anymore, but to come back to Wolverine, you had written some patch miniseries, and you wrote actually some one-shots of Wolverine and then backup stories. Does it always feel, and you've gone back to G.I. Joe over at IDW when they were doing it, and I assume whoever the new license holder is going to be, you'll still be writing the G.I. Joe Real American Hero, continuing?
Yep.
Okay. So you may know who the new license holder is while the rest of the world is still wondering who it might be.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, but I can't tell you who it is.
We won't say a word. All right. So how was it coming back to those characters after years? Especially characters like Wolverine and going back to writing G.I. Joe like you never left. I guess that's a little bit different, right?
Well, I never really left G.I. Joe, but, and, Wolverine comes pretty natural to me. I don't, like things like Wolverine or G.I. Joe or the Nth Man or.
Oh my gosh, Nth Man.
I don't have to think about those. I can't really do these books that have got really super complicated, continuity and backstories because, I don't read comics.
So writing a character like Wolverine coming back. It just comes
well,
natural.
For instance, they asked me to write the novelization of the death of Captain America. Okay.
That's right, yeah.
The reason they asked me was that it was so behind schedule, they only had 3 months to do it. And I was the only writer that would commit to doing it in 3 months.
Well, you're about the deadlines, aren't you? Man, you're the guy to go to if they're running like close to deadline. We get Larry Hama, write it, draw it.
I'm faster than hell, but I don't like to tell the companies that, but I hadn't read a Captain America comic since Jack Kirby did it, So
Oh, wow.
I didn't know anything about the continuity. They said, oh, well, we'll send you all these issues. So they sent me something like 5 or 6 years worth of Captain America, including the whole death of Captain America stuff. So I had to like
And then you had to kill 'em off.
I had to plow through the whole thing just to be able to,
Yeah.
to write the thing. Fortunately, I'm a speed reader and I can read fairly fast, but I had to do all that before I could even start writing it, and I only had 3 months to do it.
That's some research, man. That's awesome.
But that book actually did fairly well. They even made an audio book out of it.
Yeah, they did. So where can we find Larry Hama these days when he's not working on G.I. Joe for an unknown publisher so far?
Well, I'm working on a whole bunch of stuff I can't talk about, but I'm also doing a 30-page Carnage.
Oh, yeah?
Shot, yeah. And I'm doing some movie and TV development stuff. And,
Nice.
I keep him busy. Yeah.
So any acting going on in Larry's life?
No.
What about music? Because I did mention you were a musician. Do you still play
I
music?
haven't really played with the band in many years. I still have all the guitars and stuff, but
So to end this interview, I gotta ask about my favorite character of all time, which is Wolverine. and you are the reason. Yeah, Chris Claremont, of course, and a couple of other writers here and there, Frank Miller. But you are mainly the reason why he is my favorite character. My favorite Wolverine stories have all now pretty much been collected in the Wolverine Omnibus Volume 3, which is Larry Hama, Mark Silvestri. Oh my gosh, I love those stories. How is that different than working on G.I. Joe? Like, were you ready to come on board? Because you mentioned not really working on superheroes. You wanted to write talking animals, funny animals. So did Marvel approach you after John Byrne, Archie Goodwin left the book, or how did that come about?
They were about to cancel it, so they figured Hama couldn't mess it up anymore. And I liked that because, because it was in such poor repute that they didn't care. They didn't lean on me. They didn't make me go to meetings and stuff. So I could just do whatever I wanted. I mean, that's my criteria is like, I'd rather work on stuff that they leave me alone on, you know. Um, I don't care if the page rate on like G.I. Joe is lower than other books because it's 1/10 the hassle.
So both like for GI Joe, like both the toy company and
Actually, if you got no hassle and they don't make you redo stuff and they don't edit the hell out of it, that to me that makes up that's worth twice as much.
worth it then.
Yeah, it's worth it.
Awesome. Okay, so I had no idea.
Working, lots of times you're working with editors that have no idea what they're doing. They have no visual sense. It's too exasperating. I mean, how can you be a comic book editor if you have no visual sense? I remember one guy. I went back to him about the script. His girlfriend had written the script. It was a Spider-Man script, and I said, there's this panel here where, J. Jonah Jameson is up on the 50th floor of this building in his office, and he's looking down on the street, down below, 50 floors below, and he sees Peter Parker coming down the sidewalk. And Peter Parker is passing this wastebasket, and in the wastebasket is a copy of the Daily Bugle with Spider-Man's picture on the front page. And I said, you can't get this into one drawing.
Right.
And this guy looked at me and said, what are you talking about? It's all there in the script. She's explained everything. He did not understand,
Visual storytelling takes some.
And that's the type of people that they've got editing comic books these days.
So, yeah, I mean, you were there in.
I was one of the few editors they ever hired that could actually draw.
Well, I mean, I remember when you were editing. Well, going back and reading classic stories like Conan, you were doing some of that stuff, and you were, a writer's editor. Yeah, some of the stuff that I've read about the Jim Shooter era too, like working under him, and you hear there's definitely a divisive voice when it comes to Shooter, like how much of a hard ass he was, but he got, oh my gosh, his era was just. Oh yeah, nothing comes close to that era.
Not only that, but he got, under him, everybody got royalties, they got raises, they got all sorts of benefits. He gave, 80% of the people who were in the business at the time their jobs, and I didn't agree with, I was asked to join the lynch mob, and I refused.
Man of integrity, as well as writer, artist, musician.
I said, look, he gave me my job. I owe him that, and you owe him that, but they didn't give a shit.
Do you miss those days working together that close to this group of people?
Well, but those days are gone. You can't duplicate that. It was a whole. It was a very small community. It was like living in a small town. Everybody knew each other. We all partied together. Everybody was married to everybody else's ex-wife. you know, it was very incestuous and very, you know, it was like a small hillbilly town.
I don't think I've heard that before, that comparison.
Yeah, but that's what it was like. And now, nobody knows each other, and
Yeah, we have this work from home attitude, and you email things in or PDF them or PDF.
but back then, lots of, established guys had assistants, and that's how you got into the business. You started working as somebody's assistant, and you learned the trade. You learned the trade handed down to you, in person, and that's a lot different than like learning it from a video or from a book.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to again thank you for your time, and thank you for Wolverine and GI Joe. And I'm so glad that you're still writing GI Joe. So is there any project? Well, you said you couldn't talk about. Is there any project that you could talk about where we can find Larry Hama working next?
Can't really talk about it.
Can't really talk about it. Smart man. Thank you, sir, and thank you all so much for watching.
Okay.